First commentary video I've done. I want to make it kind of into a bit of a thing I'm going to do. I'm going to see how this one goes and see if you enjoy it, but I might continue doing it, I'm not sure. Today's topic is payware. What do you really get for your money? What's the difference between, for example, I'm sitting here at the Gate KSEA in a default 7.4. I want to show you the differences between this and the PMDG. Why they're better, well, why this one's worse, because PMDG really isn't. It all looks normal. It all looks like it's going to work in the 7.4, but let's just start off here with the flight management computer. This doesn't work. It's just dead. You can't get it to work, and that is a big letdown with this plane. It takes a lot of work to program, so I can see why they didn't do it, but it is just dead. There's no point in being there. Another thing, half these gauges really just don't work unless you go into the cockpit view, which is just really appalling. Like, see, they just don't work. It's just really bad. The lights up here, they're really limited. This whole overhead panel section here, just nothing works. Like, the engine start works, but that's about it. None of this, nothing. It's just, it may as well just be a picture. Again, down here, lots of this, swathes of this don't work. This FMC here. And I don't know, you just get the feeling they just didn't put the effort into it. I don't know. The primary flight display here doesn't work as well. It doesn't display your route. You can't put a route in the FMC. Fly any of this. And there's little things like, if we go outside view here, plane here, you can see the landing gear. Right, when you take off, the landing gear should hang in a 7.4, and it doesn't. As we're on the topic of issues with the exterior of the 7.4, you can see the textures are sort of blurry. They're okay. You zoom in like pretty far, and it kind of becomes a pixelated, blurry mess, which, you know, it's not the best, but it's okay. There's also no real carriers. You can't get Virgin, you can't get, BA, you can't get any of them because legal reasons. It's just you just can't. And also wing warp, wing flex in a real world plane. When you leave the ground, you can see the wings physically move under the forces that are being exerted under them. But in this, there's none. Along with no hanging gear, and it just no real modelling. It's a static plane. It doesn't move with the elements. It's just stuck. I don't know. It's just not very good on the outside. Again, like blurry mess. Really, that's about as sum it up. Back inside the virtual cockpit, there's a few more things to mention here that don't really work. The bank indicator that you tell the autopilot how much degrees of bank or severity of bank almost you want it to use, that doesn't work at all, even when you're in the 2D panel view. Another thing is flaps. It's a little thing, but it's not really important. When you drop to flaps 1, as you can see, I'm going to drop down to flaps 20 here. It does it very, very fast. It doesn't do that in reality. It takes quite a long time to bring it down to the first setting, but it does it very fast in this default plane. I'm sure there's many more things I can't think off the top of my head, but the list goes on, and we're not on to the best part yet of flight dynamics. The flight dynamics of this plane are truly apocalyptically bad. If you slightly put one foot out wrong, it will stall. I mean, it will stall for anything. It will stall. I'm not a poor pilot. It will just stall. I've stalled this thing about twice, and it's the only plane I ever stalled on FSX, unwillingly. But you drop it below 141, and you're in the danger zone. It will want to just fall out of the sky. There's also no stick shaker, so it's just straight into a vertical dive. You ruin your 10-hour flight like I did across the Atlantic, and you're not happy. It just doesn't seem to respond right as well to trim. It's all just gooey and not really responsive enough to what you want. It's manages precise yet imprecise at the same time. There's also no cockpit callouts like 50, 40 minimums, all that. None of that. What else is there? There are a few other things. Oh yeah, the shape of the cockpit here. This is longer in reality. There's not this small little void. There's a chair here and a chair behind. Well, from the ones I've seen, I can't really be 100% sure about that, but I'm pretty sure. Yeah, well, that's about all I can think of negative-wise. I'm going to go for a short flight in this and try and prove some of the poor flight dynamics of it. Just not me ranting, but actually showing some proof. Okay, as you can see now, we're about 2,000 feet up. I'm just trying to keep it about level, just to A few other things I didn't mention before is the primary flight display here with the artificial horizon on. Lots of things are missing from it. You should have bands to show you which way your safety flaps are, like the speeds between each flap settings should be safety. Many things. It just doesn't look authentic really at all. There should be on the primary when you get you know, there's just so many things. You'll see it when I get to the PMDG. I'm just bringing it up to about, I'm going to try and bring it to about 141 knots here, just to try and get it to stall, just to prove that the flight dynamics. Okay, bringing it down to around 139 knots now. You know, it's quite low for this plane, and it is pitching up quite a lot now, so it's desperately wanting to stall. But if you just drop the power slightly, 136, pitching up more and more and more and more and more. Now stall, stall, stall. Bring the nose down. That was a recoverable stall, but nonetheless, still a stall. As you can see, you know, I do have to pitch it up, and you do have to be off the ball to make it stall still, you know. It's still a pilot error in the end of the day, but it's very stall happy, as I suppose you'd describe it. Okay, got the autopilot on now, just so I can concentrate more on the terribleness of this plane. Another thing to mention is the sounds that come with this plane. They're not good at all. I describe it as a hairdryer, or maybe a very horrible screeching cat, something like that. The engines sound horrible. I just, you know what? There you go. I'm going to mute it. I really can't stand them. They're terrible. They just hum, like hiss and hum, and they just don't have any depth, or they just make you want to turn the sound off. That's all it made me ever want to do. I used this plane so much, I always thought all jet engines sounded horrible, and then until I actually heard one, and they don't. They genuinely sound beautiful, but this thing makes them sound horrible. Another thing to mention, I know I've mentioned it before, the autopilot panel up here, it's kind of a mishmash of stuff that doesn't exist and stuff that does, and missing out stuff, just to sort of get it to work sort of ish. Like, there should be over here by the first officer's side, there should be the 3 separate autopilots that control you know, all the separate aspects of the plane, but here there's just one. As you can see, isn't lit up. I just spent the last 3 or 4 minutes trying to get the autopilot working, forgetting that none of the buttons in the virtual cockpit actually work. You have to go to the 2D cockpit. Even though I mentioned that earlier, it still fooled me again. You have to. It's just a mess. It works barely, along with the ILS. Like the ILS, it's not a true Cat 3 ILS as you know people say it is on the default. It's just not. It manages to intercept, you know, it intercepts the glide slope, intercepts the localizer. It will bring you down, but then you have to disengage the autopilot and manually flare the aircraft. That's not true autopilot. In the real thing, it flares itself, touches down, keeps on the center line, does it all itself. That's an auto land. This is sort of a ish, an auto land-ish. I'd call it half and half. It does the easy bit. It's not very hard to keep on a steady descent rate of a path that you've got drawn for you by electronic equipment. That's all this thing can do, really. And as you can see here, like I was on about the flight display here with the heading and everything on, it's blank. You can't zoom in and out. You can't change from plan mode. You can't change the scale. It's just this, you know, it's just an approach almost mode, and then nothing you can change, even though it says it's in plan mode, but whatever. I think this is probably about it. I'm going to have to leave it here. There are other things, but this would just be me ranting for about 10 minutes, so I'm going to move on to the PMDG. Okay, as you can see, we're now in the PMDG cockpit. I don't know, instantly as you come in here, it almost strikes me as a lot more detail, a lot more depth with everything. It just seems like effort's been put in. Everything's in the right place, like model like reality. You can see the first thing I noticed here is the auto panel pilot is correct. There's all these 3 autopilots here, like I was saying, controlling different aspects of the plane. You know, it's all just set up right. And you got the ECAS panel at the end and first officer stuff over there. If you come down here, this is my favourite part of all payware planes, and majority of them have them if they come with it reality, is the FMC. If you don't know what the FMC is, it stands for Flight Management Computer. It's almost an interface between the pilot and all the plane systems. It allows you to control all the aspects of all the different systems in one place. like, because there's 3 or 4 computers, but this talks to all of them. So I'll just give you a quick tour. Here you can enter your gross weight, and you can put, fuel reserves, and what it does is cost index, you just put 90, and cruise altitude. What it does is it calculates things for you. This was what was just dead before in the default plane. And here you can take off. If you put in flaps 20, because it's a normal takeoff, it calculates all your V speeds over on this side. So you just accept them, and that's really valuable tool, because in the old 7.4 you had to calculate it yourself, which was time consuming, and you don't even do that in reality, and it just, otherwise you just guessed, which is what most people do, and it makes for a takeoff that's just not as good as it could be, even though, because you don't have the information at hand. Like here it gives you trim settings that it expects, and you have all your SIDs and stars programmed to this departure and arrival, but there's so much here, I really can't go through it in this quick overview. I'll just move back up to the rest of the plane. Over here you can see, like, just everything's here, everything works. Like, there's an FMC here, and you're never going to use it because you got one over there, but they programmed it anyway, so it's still a fully functioning FMC. You can use it, but there's no need for it to be there. If they were really doing like the default methodology where minimum was best, they wouldn't bother doing it, but they did. You can use it. You got everything here, locking the doors, everything works. Back here you got the real world design cockpits. Your chairs move. I know it's a little thing, but it all adds to the effect of you're really here. Everything is here. You can just move this chair out of the way. Let's move this out of the way. You can open the door and have a look into the cockpit at the back. Well, not the cockpit, the first class area of the plane. You can just have a look in there. Shut the door again. Things like these visors here, like sun visors, they open and close. It's just little things make a big difference. I'm going to move over to the overhead panel, which actually works. Okay, here you can see the overhead panel with fully functional. Everything works. Like start the APU, turn the battery on and off. It really does. Everything has cause and effect. Everything works. Everything. Like, you can flick any button and it will all do something. Now you have to be prepared to put time and effort into using some of these systems, because you can't just jump into it like the default and go for a quick flight. You need to set it up and really know what you're doing if you want to get to learn these. But if you're buying a payware plane, the idea is you want to take your hobby, or like I'm using it, training, really to the next level. You want to push it further than you almost meant to. This allows you to do this. I'll just show you, like, if you drop to flaps 20 again here, you can see how slow it takes the flaps to drop. Like I was on about, it's a very small thing, but I like it. I like the fact that it is real world. It's really like that. But as you can see, the engine's displays, it's so realistic, the PMDG. It comes with different flight models for different engines. At the moment we're loaded out with the Rolls-Royce engines. You can have the General Electric and Pratt & Whitney, and they all have tiny different flight characteristics, like slightly different engine noises, slightly different displays here to display the engine configurations, how they really have it. Just everything works. I mean, everything. I know I keep going on about it, but it is amazing that they've managed to fully simulate a 7.4 cockpit with every system intact. The only thing they didn't do is the weather radar, which is a bit of a letdown, but you can get add-ons for it. I haven't got around to it yet, as the weather radar will be here on this panel, and you'd have showing your current weather, like, in front and behind. But you can just look that up anyway, and it's not it's not a huge thing, and it is a lot of effort to get working. I'm going to move on to the outside of the plane so you can have a look.